If your doctor has told you that the answer to poor leg circulation is to walk more, they're not wrong, but they may have left out something more important, because there's a clinical trial published in the Journal of Vascular Surgery that put walking head-to-head against a different exercise, a simpler one you can do in your kitchen, your living room, while you're waiting for coffee to brew. And when they measured the results after 8 weeks, the walking group showed zero improvement on every outcome they tracked. The other group improved on all of them. That other exercise is a calf raise. And if you have any concerns about your leg circulation, swelling, fatigue, cramping, cold feet, or just legs that feel heavy by the end of the day, the mechanism behind why this works is something every person over 65 needs to understand. Most people have no idea that the calf muscle functions as a second heart. We'll get into exactly what that means, but the short version is this. Every time that muscle contracts, it generates enough pressure to push blood from your lower legs all the way back up to your heart against gravity. When it stops working efficiently, which happens gradually with age, inactivity, and circulatory disease, blood pools, pressure builds, tissue suffers. The calf raise is how you turn that pump back on. Here's what we're going to cover. The physiology of why leg circulation deteriorates after 65, and why most people don't feel it until it's already a problem. Then the research, what the trial actually found, and why the mechanism surprised even the researchers. And finally, exactly how to do this and what to realistically expect. Let's start with what's actually happening in your legs. Your heart pumps blood down to your legs without much difficulty. Gravity helps. The problem has always been getting it back up. Blood returning from the feet to the heart has to travel upward, sometimes 3 to 4 feet, against the full force of gravity. The cardiovascular system solves this with a combination of vein valves that prevent backflow and muscular contraction that actively squeezes blood upward. The calf muscle is the primary engine of that return trip. When you walk, your calf contracts and releases with every step. Each contraction generates enough pressure to push a substantial column of blood upward through the veins toward the heart. The valves close behind it, preventing it from falling back. Then the muscle relaxes, the veins refill, and the next contraction sends another pulse upward. This is the calf muscle pump, and it does the work that most people attribute entirely to the heart. Here's what changes after 65. Muscle mass decreases with age. That's well established. But the specific loss of calf muscle function is underappreciated as a circulatory issue. When the pump weakens, blood doesn't return as efficiently. It pools in the lower legs. Venous pressure builds. You get swelling. You get fatigue. In more serious cases, you get permanent skin changes, chronic wounds, and a condition called venous insufficiency that affects roughly 15 to 30% of adults, with the prevalence rising sharply after 65. At the arterial side, the picture is just as serious. Peripheral artery disease, narrowing of the arteries that supply the legs, affects 12 to 20% of Americans over 65. That's roughly 1 in 8 people in that age group walking around with meaningfully reduced blood flow to their legs. And here's what makes that number alarming. About 2/3 of those people have no classic symptoms. No obvious leg pain, just a slow, quiet loss of function, legs that tire faster, feet that are perpetually cold, wounds on the lower legs, or feet that take longer to heal than they used to. Most of them don't know anything is wrong, and this is where I want you to understand something about trajectory. Reduced circulation to the lower limbs is not a stable problem, it compounds. Blood flow that's slightly inadequate today puts stress on the muscle tissue that depends on that flow. The tissue responds by becoming less capable. Muscle fibers shrink, energy production in the muscle cells deteriorates. The tissue becomes less able to extract what oxygen does arrive, which means the functional impairment grows faster than the circulation problem itself. A study following 726 men and women over age 55 found that those with moderate circulatory restriction were 2.7 times more likely to become unable to walk for 6 minutes without stopping, not immediately, but over time. Those with severe restriction were nearly 12 times more likely to reach that level of impairment, not to become uncomfortable, to become unable. That's where this road leads when nobody intervenes. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, this is the difference between someone who can still move through their own life on their own terms and someone who can't make it to the end of the block. Someone who can still stand at a kitchen counter and cook a meal for the people they love, and someone who has to sit down halfway through. Someone who can still get into a car unassisted and drive themselves to an appointment, and someone who can't. It doesn't arrive in a single moment. It's a slow narrowing, and that's exactly why this matters, because the intervention is simple, it's free, and the research behind it is real. You don't need a gym, you don't need a prescription, you need to understand how the pump works and how to train it. Researchers at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology and the Department of Vascular Surgery at St. Olav's Hospital ran a randomized trial specifically designed to answer a question that had never been properly tested. Is there a better exercise than walking for people with compromised leg circulation? 29 patients with leg cramping and pain caused by reduced arterial blood flow, what doctors call intermittent claudication, were randomized to one of two groups. Both groups were given home-based exercise instructions, no gym, no supervision, just a protocol to follow. The walking group was told to walk near their pain threshold for at least 30 minutes, 3 times a week. That's the standard prescription. That's what vascular patients have been told for decades. The calf raise group was told to do a specific calf raise exercise 3 times a day. 8 weeks later, they measured everything: walking distance, time to onset of pain, peak walking time, mitochondrial function in the calf muscle tissue, adherence. The results were not close. The calf raise group improved their pain-free walking distance by 44 meters, their maximum walking distance by 99 meters, time before pain onset increased by 123 seconds, peak walking time increased by 104 seconds, all statistically significant, all meaningful in terms of what these patients could actually do in their daily lives. The walking group, none of those variables improved, not one. Adherence told a similar story. 100% of the calf raise group stuck to the protocol. 80% of the walking group did, which makes sense when you think about it. Walking to the point of pain, which is what the protocol requires, is difficult to sustain. It hurts. It requires leaving the house. It requires time and motivation and a certain tolerance for discomfort. The calf raise, done in 3 short sets throughout the day while doing other things, asks much less of you and delivers more. And here's what the researchers found when they looked at why. Because the mechanism turned out to be the counterintuitive part. Most people, and many clinicians, assume that exercise improves leg circulation by increasing blood flow, more blood moving through the arteries, more oxygen reaching the tissue. That seems like the obvious mechanism. The blood flow didn't change. What changed was the calf muscle's ability to use the blood it was already receiving, specifically mitochondrial activity in the muscle tissue, the cellular machinery responsible for converting oxygen into energy, increased significantly in the calf raise group. The muscle didn't get more blood, it got better at extracting what it had. This is a critical distinction because it means the benefit doesn't require fixing the underlying arterial problem. It doesn't require a stent or a bypass or a pharmaceutical intervention. It requires training the tissue to work more efficiently within its current constraints. The calf muscle, repeatedly brought to the edge of its capacity and then allowed to recover, which is exactly what the calf raise protocol does, responds by upgrading its own cellular infrastructure. More mitochondria, better oxygen extraction, greater endurance before fatigue and pain set in. And because the exercise creates controlled, brief periods of reduced blood supply followed by recovery, it essentially triggers the muscle's own repair and adaptation response. The researchers called this preconditioning, The muscle learns to do more with less. That's not a metaphor. That's the measured, biologically verified mechanism from a published clinical trial. The Norwegian trial focused on patients with arterial disease, reduced blood flow in, but the calf pump matters just as much on the other side of the circulatory equation, getting blood back out. This brings in a second line of evidence worth understanding because it applies to a broader group. If you don't have a diagnosed circulation problem, but you do have legs that swell by the end of the day, ankles that feel puffy, skin on the lower legs that's become discolored or thickened, that's venous insufficiency, and it's even more common than arterial disease in older adults. Researchers at Rutgers and the New Jersey Medical School ran a randomized trial in patients with advanced chronic venous insufficiency, people with skin changes, active or recently healed leg ulcers. The experimental group did a structured exercise program built primarily around calf strengthening. The control group got compression stockings and standard care. 6 months later, the exercise group's calf pump function had returned to a normal range. The amount of blood ejected per contraction increased significantly. The amount of blood pooling in the leg after repeated contractions, a direct measure of how poorly the pump was working, improved significantly. The control group showed neither change. What those numbers mean in practical terms, the exercise group's legs were doing the job they were supposed to do. The pump that had been failing was working again, not because the veins had changed, not because the valves had been repaired, because the muscle driving the pump had been trained. This is the piece most patients never get told. Compression stockings are important. They reduce symptoms and prevent damage, but they don't rebuild the pump. Exercise does. And for people without diagnosed disease, which is most of the people watching this, the implications are straightforward. The calf pump weakens with age and inactivity, whether or not you have a clinical diagnosis. The intervention is the same. Which brings us to the practical question: exactly how do you do this? The movement itself is simple. Stand with your feet flat on the floor, hip width apart. Rise onto your toes as high as you comfortably can. Hold for 1 to 2 seconds at the top. Lower back down slowly and deliberately. That's 1 repetition. The Norwegian protocol had patients doing this 3 times a day, with enough repetitions to bring the calf muscle to fatigue. The key element, the one the researchers emphasized, is that you should reach a point where the muscle is genuinely working hard, not uncomfortable in a painful sense, but working. That's what triggers the mitochondrial adaptation. For most people starting out, somewhere between 10 and 20 repetitions per set is a reasonable starting point. Over days and weeks, as the muscle adapts, the number you can do before fatigue increases. That progression is the training effect at work. If standing balance is a concern, do these holding the back of a chair or at a kitchen counter. The support doesn't reduce the circulatory benefit, it just keeps the movement safe. If you're seated for long periods during the day, at a desk, in a car, watching television, ankle pumps are a useful complement. Point your toes down, then pull them back toward your shin rhythmically. A study of 307 adults found that just 5 minutes of ankle pumps increased blood flow velocity in the leg veins measurably, and the pace didn't matter. Slow or fast, the effect was equivalent. And if you have diagnosed peripheral artery disease, venous insufficiency, or diabetes with peripheral involvement, this is not a substitute for medical management. Talk to your vascular surgeon or physician before starting. The exercise is almost certainly going to be part of what they recommend, but they need to know your full picture first. The calf muscle is the lever, 3 times a day. No gym required. Start this week. If you found this useful, subscribe. There's more on circulation, mobility, and what the clinical evidence actually shows for adults over 65.